Hi, my name is Mary, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you the top nonfiction books that I read in 2019. This was a really difficult list to make, so I made the list, and then I kept looking at it, and I kept thinking, I think this is it, I think this is everything, and then I would think of another book, and I'd have to swap things out. So this is where I feel like it is right now, and we'll see what really stands the test of time. These books are in no particular order. I just picked the top 10 and then just kept fussing with the list. So at this point, this is where it is. In no particular order, let's get started. The first book that I want to talk about is The Trial of the Templars by Malcolm Barber. This is an academic history book, which is short but punchy and powerful, and it's all about how the Templars fell. So the Templars were a order of crusading knights, and there's a lot of rumors about the Templars, which actually started when they were dismantled by the French king. And so there's just this interesting history there of myth making, because today, think about the Assassin's Creed games and all this mystique that they give the Templars over time, but that's just not true, and it's not historically accurate. Of course, they're doing it for video game purposes. Anyway, this is a really excellent book. I thought it was easy to read, I thought it was well researched, and it answered a persistent and niggling question in my mind, because I didn't know anything about the Templars or how they collapsed. So if you are a historian, or if you love medieval history and you're ready to move past some of the popular medieval history, this is definitely, I think, a great book on a very, very interesting subject. Number 2 that I want to talk about is Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup by John Carreyrou. This is a book by the journalist who broke the story of the Theranos company, which was a company who promised that they could run this huge battery of tests from a single drop of blood and gained a lot of money in startup funds and in investment, but they couldn't do it at all. And so this is such an interesting and riveting book. I made almost everyone in my life read it because I was just so fascinated by it. And it read like compelling fiction because you just kept turning the page wondering, how did this happen? How did nobody know? How did they trick so many people? And why? How could you get so caught up in this lie? And I don't think there was any person who could have told it better than the journalist who was talking with these sources when the story broke. This, I think, is a well worth your time story. I am compiling right now for myself a TBR of books that are true crime but not about murder. So things like this. So if you have any recommendations for books that are like this, definitely leave a comment down below and recommend them to me. Speaking of nonfiction that is true crime themed without being murder, I also read and adored this year The Feather Thief, a story of beauty, obsession, and the natural history heist of the century by Kirk Wallace Johnson. This is a book about a young man who began to break into the Natural History Museum in London to get rare bird pelts to use in fly tying, which is if you didn't know, because I have no idea, fly tying is a kind of art form of making different lures that have different kind of patterns of feathers on them to catch certain kinds of fish, but it's turned into its own art form from the 19th century to now. And this was so unexpected. I really had no idea what I was getting myself in for, because I don't know anything about fly tying. Obviously, I just had to explain what that was. Or fly fishing, actually. I didn't know what that was until I read the book. I had no idea about this kind of subculture that had grown up around it, and I didn't know that I would be so compelled by it. But I was, and I think that Kirk Wallace Johnson has done a fantastic job of telling this story, and it's something that I will continue to recommend to a ton of people as time goes on. Next is another academic history book. This is The Witch Hunt in Early Modern Europe by Brian P. Levack. This is, as far as I am concerned now, the book that should introduce everybody to the field of the witch hunts, because it takes the time to not only give you a fabulous history, but also to dispel some of the lingering myths about the witch hunts, which are one of those periods in history that people know about, but most people's conception of what they were is just so totally off base from real history because of the way it's appeared in pop culture and the way it's used politically and all of these different things. And so this was an excellent background to the witch hunts. It talks to you about how legal evolutions in early modern Europe actually made it possible to have something like this huge judicial event that were the witch hunts, and how religion played a role, and how cultural developments made a role, and how different cultures kind of blending together made it happen. And this is fantastic. I really liked this book. It was very approachable, very easy to read. A book that I would recommend for somebody who's just starting to get into early modern history. It's high time I put a biography on this list, and my favorite biography that I read this year probably was Born to be Posthumous, The Eccentric Genius and Mysterious Life of Edward Gorey by Mark Dery. This is a book which is about Edward Gorey, who was an artist who lived in the 20th century, who inspired many of the kind of gothic aesthetics of the modern period, definitely a huge inspiration for Tim Burton, and I grew up loving Edward Gorey a lot. I had the Ghastly Crumb Tinies poster on my wall as a preteen, and I just absolutely adored his work, but I didn't know anything about him as a person. What I think makes this an excellent biography is that Mark Dery and Edward Gorey have similar senses of humor, and so Mark Dery is able to convey Edward Gorey, like his personality, almost effortlessly. He's really able to do it well, and I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was a great read. I think at the time I gave it 4 stars, but in retrospect, it's another book that has stuck with me so much. It's made it onto my top 10. Next is The Butchering Art, Joseph Lister's Quest to Transform the Grisly World of Victorian Medicine by Lindsey Fitzharris. So this is a book about Joseph Lister. You probably know him from Listerine, which is now a brand of mouthwash, but was also a brand of disinfectant. And Joseph Lister was the man who tried to convey the importance of washing your hands and disinfecting your tools to a Victorian society that was not interested. Why were they not interested? Doesn't everyone want to have clean hands? Apparently not. This was such a fun book because it was grisly and well written and compelling, and had just some of the most interesting scenes in it that I've ever read in nonfiction. So there's a scene of some of the surgeries that were happening that really made me go, ooh, it gives you the shivers, and I'm not a person that gets the willies very, very easily. So this is a book that I would highly recommend to people who are interested in the 19th century. I know this is a booktube darling, so it probably goes without saying, but definitely a recommendation from me. The other biography that I have on this list I just could not leave off. That is this one, Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman by Robert K. Massie. Unfortunately, we lost Robert K. Massie earlier this year in December, and I think that is a real shame because I love the way that he writes. This is a portrait of Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, and it is a sensitively and beautifully told story. It gives her due as a monarch and as somebody who was a force of nature, while also paying attention to her life and her personality and her just existence and her family. And I think that this is wonderful, and I really enjoyed reading it, and I want to read another Robert K. Massie book in the near future. So unfortunately there aren't that many, so we'll see how soon I can get to the next one. Next is Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. This is a book that I put on here because when I read it, I felt seen by it, which is a very strange feeling that I don't often get in nonfiction. It was an experience where I was reading it and thinking, oh, so that's why I do what I do. Yikes. So this is a book about introverts, and especially introverts in the workforce. And it is an argument that introverts can actually be really powerful in the workforce, whereas often, if like me, I worked in a sales background for a little while, which surprises even myself because I am so introverted, but her description of what it can be like to be an introvert in that sales environment is truly compelling, and her argument for why we are valuable contributors to office environments I found very refreshing, because all of these kinds of office environments, if you read any business book, there's usually something about how you need to force yourself to be extroverted, how you need to just get out there. But there's something to be said for being quiet and reflective and having a kind of social sensitivity that some extroverts lack. That's not to say all of them, but certainly some of them. The highlight of this book for me is a description where she goes to a sales event. I think it's a Tony Roberts sales event. I could be wrong about that, but I think it is. And just her reaction to this like hype up sales culture was my reaction to working in sales as well, and I think it is just a magnificent book and definitely worth the read. Another nonfiction book that I have not stopped talking about is this one, The Hare with Amber Eyes by Edmund de Waal. This is Edmund de Waal's family memoir, almost, of his family who collected Japanese netsuke. So he uses these netsuke and traces them back in the history of his family to tell the story of his family about how they were wealthy collectors and then how they got chased out of Europe. And it's just a powerful meditation on what it means to have a collection of artwork and to have a connection to that artwork that spans generations, and how, as an artist, he is really concerned with the way that other people receive his artwork, and yet how he can use the example of his own family to quell his own anxieties about that, or to increase them, as the case may be. This is a beautiful book. It is one of my gold standards for memoirs now, because I think it is just truly magnificently told, and definitely one of the highlights of anything that I read this year. Lastly, I want to give my gold standard for nonfiction books that I read in 2019, which is called Say Nothing, A True Story of Murder and Memory in Northern Ireland by Patrick Redden Keefe. This is a book about a murder case in Northern Ireland, but it sets this murder case against the background of the Troubles and about how these people in Northern Ireland were living and trying to survive as there was this struggle between the IRA and the British forces and trying to determine what the future of Ireland would be. It is atmospheric, it is historical, it is beautifully written, but more than that, I love what it represents for the true crime genre, which is a genre that can sometimes just kind of meddle in its own grossness. It can be an unpleasant genre to read when you get the feeling that the author is just trying to shock you. Whereas this takes this crime as a jumping off point to talk about history and to talk about culture and to talk about this community, which I think should be the gold standard for true crime murder-ish books. If you have read this, you probably will agree with me. I think this was the runner-up to the history, I think it's the history section on the Goodreads Choice Awards. It lost out to The Five, that book about the Jack the Ripper murder victims. And if you read it like I did, you might be a little salty about that, because I think that Say Nothing is beautiful and magnificent, and I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in either true crime or history. Alright, so those are the top 10 nonfiction books that I read in 2019. This was a very hard list to write. There was a lot of really great nonfiction that I read this year, and it's been my best reading year so far with how many books that I read. So I just want to say thank you very much for spending this year with me, this half of the year, and I will see you in another video very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye!